Hello, everyone. I am honored and very appreciative that the wonderful Billy Aaron has asked me to be part of today's service, even if it is from a COVID-imposed distance, even if it is from a home studio rather than in person as I would prefer. But, as you can see, at least it is a studio with an Atlantic connection. There are so many things worthy of note about the remarkable and deeply admirable career and life of Henry Aaron. But in this case, time is limited, so I will limit my remarks to a single idea. Baseball, it has often been said, is a game of fathers and sons. Young Henry Aaron loved Herbert Aaron, but was pained by seeing the routine humiliations inflicted upon his father in the Jim Crow South, pained to see him step off the sidewalk, eyes downcast, as he let a white person pass. The possible consequences of not doing so even more terrible than the repeated indignities themselves. But a child still dreams, even when the dreams of his elders have given way to soul-crushing reality. When, as a boy, Henry told his dad he might want to grow up to be an airline pilot, the reply was, "Ain't no colored pilots." When Henry then said he dreamed of being a big league ball player, the response was, "Ain't no colored ball players." But then, on April 15th, 1947, when Henry Aaron was 13, Jackie Robinson played his first game as a Brooklyn Dodger. Maybe Henry's dad had been wrong. A year or so later, as the Dodgers barnstormed their way north from spring training in Florida up to Brooklyn, they stopped to play an exhibition game in Mobile. On the morning of the game, Jackie Robinson addressed a small group of black citizens. Henry Aaron skipped school to hear him speak. Later, at the ballpark, lacking the money for a ticket, Henry climbed a tree beyond the right field fence, and from that vantage point, got his first on-field look at his idol and inspiration. As it turned out, Herbert Aaron was mistaken. His son would not only become a big league ball player, he would become one of the very greatest of all time, a Mount Rushmore player. Taken alone, Henry Aaron's monumental achievements on the diamond would have made him unforgettable, made him elite even among Hall of Famers. But statistics and records alone don't account for the sustained and deeply appreciative applause that greeted Henry Aaron every summer at Cooperstown, for the respect that rose to reverence among fellow Hall of Famers, for the great admiration and regard in the statements this week from Presidents Carter, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden. That wasn't only about chasing down Babe Ruth. It was about staring down some of the worst of America and prevailing as an enduring symbol of much of what can be best about America. About a man whose quiet courage and resolve, whose dignity and decency, whose abiding commitment to helping others made him more than a great ball player. Taken together, those qualities made him a genuinely great man and a great American. Jackie Robinson famously said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." More than 70 years ago, Jackie Robinson had no way of knowing the impact he would have on a kid who skipped school to hear him speak and climbed a tree to see him play. No way to know that that kid would go on to become, in many respects, the most significant baseball player since Jackie Robinson himself. That kid would take the baton from his idol and inspiration and carry it so well, so honorably, and for so long. And now that glorious race has been fully run. Rest in peace, Mr. Aaron. It has been an honor to know you.